Republican senators in Olympia, Senators Jeff Wilson and Mike Patton, have introduced, thankfully, the first bill that I've seen to try to thwart some of this harassment and intimidation of signature gatherers that we experienced personally over the summer when collecting signatures for Referendum 101. What we're seeing right now with a snitch line that the Democratic Party is pushing out there. So if they find out someone's collecting signatures, they'll send someone out there to harass them or to stand there and try to convince people not to sign, not to come up to the table. So the bill, and I'll read it in its entirety because it's very, very short and to the point. Senate Bill 5820. It says an act related to establishing protections for citizens participating in the initiative and referendum process. It says, be it enacted, no person may publicly protest another person collecting signatures for or signing any initiative or referendum petition within 25 feet of the person collecting signatures or the person signing or attempting to sign any initiative or referendum petition. So 25 feet, I think it could probably be a little bit more. 25 feet is not very much, but I think this is a good start in finding a way legislatively to protect people's First Amendment rights, to be opposed to an initiative and to protest. I'm a huge fan of the First Amendment, as I hope we all are, but also making sure that as someone is participating in an important aspect of our democracy, they don't feel intimidated and they don't feel harassed. That's not controversial stuff. That's not something that should be the desire of only one political party or one side of the aisle. I mean, that's not asking a lot. Give us a 25-foot buffer so people can make up their minds if they want to sign the thing or not without feeling intimidated out of signing it. And I've used this example before. If we had still in-person polling and you were lining up to vote at your polling location, we would never allow protesters or people standing there as you're going into the polling location at the door telling you not to vote for so-and-so. We would never allow that, ever. So why are we allowing it now when people are exercising a different but important part of the democratic process? That doesn't make any sense to me. So come on, this is common sense stuff. I asked Senator Jeff Wilson, who is one of the sponsors of this bill, to come on the show and talk about it. And yes, that is the Senator Jeff Wilson who was briefly incarcerated in Hong Kong. So rest assured, I'm going to bring that up with him as well. Senator Jeff Wilson, welcome to Undivided.
Thank you, Brandi, for having me on today.
Well, thank you for doing this bill. I hope it gains some traction. I will be talking to you about your brief stay in Hong Kong because I can't let it go. I'm very happy to see you in the United States. But let's talk about the bill first. So we've seen, I think, since the summer, some really concerning efforts to intimidate, to harass signature gatherers. Your bill puts a 25-foot buffer. Do you think it's enough?
Well, actually, it's enough for a start. And that's what we need to do as a legislative body, is to look at this problem, to recognize that there's some action that we need to take as elected servants to resolve this issue. And 25 feet, of course, it's negotiable upward. It's a baseline. It's a starting point. And for Senate Bill 5820, this is a bill I'm hoping to move very rapidly on because it's timely, as you say, Brandi. So 25 feet, we can turn into an auction amount, a good type auction, and raise that number. I would be open to that.
Yeah, I like that you say negotiate upwards. Definitely don't negotiate that number downward. So right now, it's you and your colleague, Senator Patton, on the bill, both Republicans. Do you anticipate having Democratic support?
Absolutely. And in fact, when this bill was essentially ready to be dropped, as we call it, I dropped it under an electronic version. A lot of times we do things physically in person with an actual, what we call a pink sheet. In this case, I didn't have any committee meetings that would draw me together with both sides of the aisle for that opportunity. So it's in the electronic portion of our process to gather support for.
Yeah. What do you think would be the reason for any opposition to it?
Well, this is one of those items where you shouldn't have any opposition for it. This is not really a Democratic or Republican process that we're trying to protect and respect here. Brandi, we're talking about the democratic process, whereas you said to annoy and harass should not interfere with this process. And this is going to be known somewhat as the year of the initiative. at the legislature for the short session. So I would think that both sides of the aisle who practice need to preach civility, but to further respect the process of the people. I hope we don't go into $30 car tabs and other things like this, but there's a rich history of the legislature and initiatives.
Yeah, and not just Republican-backed initiatives. There were Democrat-backed initiatives in 2018. I didn't have an opinion show at the time, but if there had been harassment of signature gatherers, I would have hoped it's something everyone was opposed to at the time. So when it comes to, at the core of this challenge for me, and it is challenging, is balancing the First Amendment rights of people to be opposed to the initiatives and to voice that opposition, which I do think is important. It's why I have this job, right? And then the ability of people free from intimidation or the feeling of harassment to consider initiatives. So how do you strike that balance in your mind?
Well, we need to strike that balance. In other words, disagreements or difference of opinions, they do require that basic principle of taking turns. People get to speak, but you speak in turns. You don't overtalk people. You don't interrupt them. You don't shout them down, and you don't bully them, because in fact, that's the preservation of the process I see, is to take your turn. Everybody gets a platform or an opportunity to exercise that First Amendment. But I think that you strike on a point. When does one person's First Amendment rights, of course, can overtake and impair somebody else's? And that's a process that does need to be 50-50. So the interference with signature gatherers, in a lot of cases, these are just regular everyday folks. Some of these are paid, some are volunteers, and they're trying to start a discussion of engagement, which is optional. Nobody forces you to stop by and sign a petition. In fact, that's a great chance for the public to get more engaged on political issues. So I just really enjoy that signature gathering theme that says, come get educated, come have a dialogue, but you're going to have to keep it simple, and you do need to take turns.
Yeah, and I loved that over the summer. Nicole and I, we volunteered to collect signatures for a referendum, and there'd be people who'd come up and talk to us, and they'd walk away and not sign it after they talked to us. But I appreciated them stopping by to learn a little bit more about what we were doing. So when it comes to Secretary of State Steve Hobbs, who is a Democrat, but I'll give him credit, because when we were experiencing intimidation and harassment over the summer, he spoke out. He used his platform to remind people about what the law is when it comes to these processes. Have you reached out to him about this bill? Do you plan to reach out to him?
Oh, absolutely. The secretary and I have a very good working relationship. In fact, it's the secretary himself that has brought forth to the committee that I serve, State Government Elections, in the Senate. He's brought forth concerns of harassments and annoyance, especially to, let's say, elections people, elections employees, election volunteers, auditor staff. And we're very receptive to that under the overall principle, don't bully people. Don't try to attack. He's been very supportive of that to preserve and protect the process. I can't speak for him specifically on this bill, but I do engage with the secretary. He has that big task in front of him to make sure that 324,000 of those signatures on, say, an initiative are in fact valid from registered voters. I know that there's in excess of signatures coming, but the Secretary of State is a large player in timely, as required by a day requirement, timely to accredit these initiatives so it can get that process to both bodies of the legislature.
Yeah, a lot going on. And you bring up a good point, the harassment of election workers, which has been happening from people on the right. I mean, none of it's time to be adults, to recognize the importance of our democracy, to let other people exercise that. Yeah, we want elections to make sure that they are done rightly and, they're fair and transparent, but we can do it without harassing and intimidating people. Senator Wilson, let me change the subject really quick before I let you go. You had us all worried, freaking sick over here. So I guess, how are you doing? For people who didn't follow the news, which I can't imagine anyone didn't hear, you went on a vacation, landed in Hong Kong, and you had a gun in your carry-on that you turned in. So can you just characterize what you went through?
Well, overall, the end result is I'm overwhelmed with positive support from the community and my constituents. And there have been, of course, some others that have been very critical. But that's being a public servant. That's to be expected. But Brandi, I've been very clear from the beginning that I've accepted responsibility. I do apologize for any inconvenience I've created or distractionary methods. But the theme of the story here too is we never wavered on really what's doing the right thing. I made a mistake. I made a human mistake. I didn't make a Republican or Democrat political mistake. I made a human mistake. And although it was challenging at times, I saw no other course that I had other than to do what I would say the right thing. Once discovered, immediately sought assistance to remedy that. And I'm pleased to say that's when, in fact, has happened. I didn't say it was an enjoyable experience. It was very unfortunate, obviously unplanned, of course.
Yeah, I mean, we hear all these stories about Americans arrested abroad. Were you scared?
Well, let's just say it's not the way you want to start your vacation. A very what we considered a well-deserved private vacation to go off and to see the world a little bit more. That was not part of the plan. But ultimately, maybe it spurns other conversations, Brandi. And where do we go from here? How do we make it better? Certainly, there's room for improvement. I'm not going to point and be critical, but we can take this as an opportunity to review things. Safety and security does matter.
Yeah.
And also how we handle ourselves. So
yeah, and I'll be a devil's advocate. We talk a lot on this show. I defend responsible gun ownership. Republicans talk a lot about that too. I said it on the show. I cannot imagine having a gun in my carry-on that I did not know about. So can you just characterize how the heck that happened?
Well, we were very short in our ability to get ready to pack, and I mistakenly grabbed a similar briefcase that I use for travel. They're all three identical. There's three actually, and I grabbed the wrong one. And in the middle of the message of this is, I know it's obvious, and I don't want to break it down to that level, but you do need to check your luggage and recheck. I have clearly accepted the responsibility for not checking well enough. And thus I did have that item unloaded in my possession. And again, I'm prepared to work out with any authorities and have done so to cooperate. And the message is, again, it's okay to be human and to err. But really, I think that, integrity and the value of how we operate, because we are elected servants, that's not for consideration. Never at one point would I sacrifice that. And I think that imagine a place where everybody would say, well, I have an issue and I'd like to report that and accept responsibility and work through that. And that's what happened. Yeah. But overall, I can't emphasize enough. It is 'tis the season to be very happy to be home now, Brandi.
Yeah, I know. Mike and I were worried sick about it, and you've just always been so kind to me. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I hope that he doesn't wind up in Hong Kong in a prison. Brittany Griner was flashing through my memory, and Lord knows I felt bad for her too. And so I'm very, very happy to see you home for what was an honest mistake that you tried to rectify pretty quickly. So Senator Jeff Wilson, enjoy, I think, with a renewed sense of gratitude, the holidays, and we'll be tracking this bill.
Thank you, Brandi.